Hello and welcome everyone to week 5 of the Creative Stretch. I am beyond excited to have our guest artist Cherryl Moote here with us. I have been a fan and a lover of Cherryl for many years, but my favorite memory of Cherryl is how freaking hilarious she is and us having dinner in Portland, Maine with our husbands and Cherryl keeping us laughing and giggling the entire time. Her art lesson at the event was spectacular, but the dinner was really the standout for me personal. So I'm Dr. Minette Riordan. I'm here with Andrea Chebalou and Cherryl Moote, and we're here to dive into a fun conversation about faith, about flexibility, and about freedom. And once again, the way all of these different values seem to be sort of snacked and connected works like magic, right, Andrea?
I every week I keep thinking one of these weeks it's just got to be like the outlier where it's just not working together and it's just not happening. So yes, once again, they all just magically, especially flexibility and freedom, the faith aspect, maybe that's the one outlier for me and just seeing the connection of it. But the faith and spirituality for me is such a core value that, it really does influence everything that I do. So, it does
So why don't
definitely.
you dive right in and talk about faith and spirituality, and then Cheryl will come around to you after that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All
So
right.
I started doing my writing on the faith aspect of it. And in my particular belief system, I believe that I'm created in my creator's likeness, right? So I am a creative being. And therefore I am creative, right? There are so many people that I hear in my line of work and teaching art classes and that sort of thing. Oh, I wish I could do that. I'm not creative. I'm like, you are, you are, you are. Maybe it doesn't manifest itself in the same way, with paint and whatever, or drawing or whatever it does, whatever. But you are creative. And so I feel so deeply for my own practice that my creativity is a gift, the way that I was created, and that is my gift back to my creator, if you will. That it's sort of it's absolutely the fabric of who I am. It's hard to even separate it out as like that's a core value. It just feels so deeper than a core value. Is that possible? It feels like the fabric of which I'm made. I don't I
Cheryl.
don't I don't know that
Yeah.
I could separate it out. Like that's it's the
Yeah.
bones. It's
Yeah.
more than just a value, because some of the values I feel like are, they come and they go, or they're stronger, or they wax and they wane. They're more present or they're less present. But this one feels like so intrinsically how I'm made, how I'm put together, that it's never gone.
I love it. Yeah. I see Cheryl's over there shaking her head, so I'd love to hear. So
Yeah,
welcome, hear your
thank
voice
you.
and your reflections.
I was raised in the church. My father was the organist, so there were lots of choir practices and all that sort of thing. And my grandmother lived with us, and she was deeply religious, knew the Bible quite literally inside out and backwards. And I, as well as you, Andrea, really believe that the reflection of God is creativity, that He was a creator. And I was also raised to believe, that parable of the talents. So you are given the talents, and you must use the talents and bring them to the forefront. So my dad. Is a musician, an amazing musician. It just runs through him. He's also a visual artist, but uh, constantly bringing that out every day, all day. And then my grandmother, worked with her hands, crocheted lace, made quilts. And so from the time I could hold a needle, she had me doing that. So those gifts, I think, are mine that need to be shared, and they need to be used. And whether they're used to, you know, make things for the bazaar at the church and sell them, or used to bring people into their own creativity, which is really why I teach. You know, I also say I was born to teach,
Yeah.
and to share that, and also in a way to make sure that those activities like crochet and quilting and bookmaking and hand lettering go forth to the next generation. I think that's really key. But the faith for me too is what bleeds into the, you know, the flexibility in particular, is that it's a bad day, let's say, and there's been a lot of them this year. But I have to have faith that if I show up to do something, anything with my hands, that's going to sustain me. And so that's part of that, you know, optimistic part of me that I try to keep going.
I love that. It's a beautiful perspective.
Yeah. So that's, you know, sort of how I've come at everything
Yeah,
that's
I
been
love that.
thrown at me.
And to me, it's interesting to, put faith slash spirituality, because I feel we could separate them out and look at them differently. Because, like Cheryl, I believe I have to have faith in myself, in my ability to move myself forward, to do the work that I'm called to do, meant to do in this world. I have a much more eclectic perspective on what spirituality means to me. And yet, like Andrea and Cheryl, it's in the very fabric of my nature. So maybe I don't practice the religion of my childhood anymore, but I definitely have a deep spiritual practice. And I definitely feel like my best work comes through me from the divine, right? And so there's this beautiful way of looking at that connection to source that I think feeds my own creative practice, and looks different every day. And I appreciated what both of you said about just that reminder that we are creative beings, that these are God-given talents and abilities. And for some people, yeah, maybe that's drawing, but all of us have the ability to bring our gifts in service to the world, right? And sometimes it takes a lot of faith to just believe enough in ourselves to own those talents and to know that they're still going to be there even when the days are hard. Because as Cheryl said, I would maintain that over the last now close to 2 years, year and a half since the beginning of the pandemic, there's been a lot of hard days that have forced us into a whole new perspective around flexibility. So it's also really interesting to me to look at flexibility as a value and how important that is to me. Like, we're in some family conversations right now about lifestyle changes and where do we want to live next and how much longer do we want to be in our current house, and we're empty nesters. And the flexibility piece to me is essential as a way of life when it comes to time freedom. So for me, the flexibility is often connected to me wanting to have control, right, of my own schedule, my own time, my own work in the world, and not have that be dictated by a job or whatever. So, but I also think about flexibility of thinking and where am I getting stuck in, having my blinders on and not being flexible about looking at new things. Or we can bring that right back to creativity. Where am I not flexible in my approach to art making? Where am I sort of sitting doing the same thing over and over again, as opposed to challenging myself or having the courage and the discipline, all of our other values, to be flexible in my approach to the page. So I feel like, again, that faith and flexibility, faith that it's all going to work out all right in the end, and flexibility to try something new on the journey, both are things that for me ultimately give me freedom. So that's kind of my, like, where what I'm thinking right now. And this is the first time I've sat down, and I'm very much a verbal processor, thought about the integration of the three together.
I love what you said about flexibility. And to me, when you think about how you get flexible physically, it takes stretching, which ties back to why we call this the creative stretch, right? You have to stretch in certain areas, and it makes it most comfortable. Growth is never comfortable, but if we do this incrementally, if we build this flexibility by incrementally stretching just a little bit every day, it doesn't have to be this huge workout that we do, but I find that I can stay most flexible by not just uprooting myself out of a habit or a way of being, but by incrementally making these small changes, remaining flexible and open to new ways of doing things, whether creatively or in lifestyle habits and just ways of being. Like, March 17, 2020 was a huge uprooting of the way things were for me. And I was, for lack of better word, sort of forced to be flexible at that moment of like, okay, sink or swim, you got to and I got into action for sure. But there was not without some, when you do that exercise and you have this buildup and of what is it, the lactic acid build? Yeah. Man, I was feeling like I got hit by a truck a little bit later, just like that flexibility. Like, had I had some easing into that, maybe it wouldn't have been so painful. But I like the thought of this willingness to change. That the definition is a willingness to change or compromise, but it's the personality trait. It's the extent of which a person can cope with changes in circumstances and think about problems and tasks in novel and creative ways. And that for me is a way of being, always looking at like, how could I do that differently? And that is honestly how my mind is, where I think flexibility is one of my top three. I would say, because that's always what's working in the back of my mind is like, yeah, that could work, but what could work better? I've always called myself a build a better mousetrap kind of girl. Like that, yeah, that could work, but maybe there's something that could work better. And it's that just constantly sort of working and reworking and being open to novel and creative ideas in the back of my mind.
And 10 years ago, I would have said the flexibility that I thought was my strength was, if I went into a rubber stamp store and was looking at a rubber stamp, I had to be able to think of at least 3 things I could do with it. Any tool or material in my studio, any paper, I'm constantly asking more of it or different of it. But what I think I can bring to the discussion on flexibility now is about physical flexibility. So we started thinking just over 3 years ago that it was time to leave our multi-storied house because I was having problems with the stairs. And my body is seizing up. There's really no way around it, nothing anyone can do. So my hands have already started to warp and stiffen. I have spinal stenosis, so my back is not allowing me to be flexible. I have literally this month just become a senior citizen. And so I think the truth that I can bring to the table at this point in my life is to tell people that if they want to stay creative and connected, they may have to be mentally flexible enough to change. And so, my calligrapher friends who've always been able to do this beautiful, tiny, minuscule lettering, they start to develop a shake or their hands stiffen, and they've got to let some of that go and go a different direction. And, even my workspace, this is my formal studio in the house, and it is downstairs. And so there are many days where I'm just not up to going back up the stairs. I can still come down them, but the backups become a challenge. And so I have a workspace on the main floor, and I've organized my materials and my tools in such a way that I can work upstairs on those days. And you know, that sort of flexibility of acceptance of what your body can do, and yet knowing that you are going to continue to art or create to the end of your days. And, you know, one of the things that's been a silver lining this summer, our family's in major transition, but my father, who just turned 88, I've got him back to his oil painting, and he's painted all summer. And, you know, he can only do a couple of hours and he gets a little frustrated. He'd like to go back down and paint another couple, and he can't. And he's learning to accept that. And he has an essential tremor now. And, you know, he's working around that, but he is painting and creating and thinking about his art every day. So I think that's another way of looking at that flexibility as we go through life stages.
I love that. In fact, I was reading a book this morning, and there was a little comment about Georgia O'Keefe, who, you know, painted for decades, but as she aged and lost her eyesight, she moved to clay. So she kept creating until she died, but she changed mediums in order to accommodate, because what was inflexible was her need to create. It's probably true for all of us. Or what was, you know, consistent was the desire to create. I see it in my own mom, who's close to 80, has Parkinson's, tremors, eyesight challenges, and still just the willingness and the desire to create, and having to make peace with it's not going to look like it used to look. You know, with her MFA in sculpture and ceramics, and she's an amazing, like, she draws so beautifully well, right? Like, it just flows out of her hands, even now with the tremors. Like, how did you do that? So it's just really magical. But watching her be in that similar conversation of what's possible, not being able to get up and down the stairs to her studio space, you know, it's makes a big difference in our identity as well, and our sense of who we are as we shift and change. So I'm curious, with, you know, the things that you're learning and seeing, Cheryl, and the direction that you're going, and then we'll kind of, you know, start to wrap this up. Where does freedom fit in the picture of everything that we've been talking about today?
Well, I'm going to talk a bit about this when I do my tape, but what I discovered when my children were quite small was that my relationship with art wasn't going to be that I had the whole day to sink myself into something, and that one of the things I could do was to package up my stuff so that I was free to do it wherever I was. So I might not have been doing a big, huge canvas, but I always had a Ziploc bag. I called myself the Ziploc mom, with a small quilting project in it. You know, the pieces for one block or whatever, and a pair of scissors, a needle, and some thread. And that baggie could fit anywhere, you know, in my purse or wherever. And that has continued through my life. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, you know, how I organize my paper, so that no matter where I am, I could do some collage, and how I pre-energize my sketchbooks with all the mucky stuff, so that there's no excuse on a down day to not work in my journal, because some of that stuff that I don't feel up to is there. And it actually, when I look at it, you know, the backgrounds that I've done in my journals ahead of time, they actually give me back energy. That sort of whole thing about pre-energizing. So I think for me, organization is freedom, which I know sounds perhaps counterintuitive, but
not to me.
You know, you can see the boxes and the trays and things in the back, so that as much as possible, and yes, this does need maintenance every once in a while, but, you know, if I'm thinking, oh, I want to do a collage and I want this particular image in it and it's on a rubber stamp, I'm not wasting what energy I have to find it. I know there's a tray marked faces that I can pull out behind me and just use. So in a way, I'm freer to create if I do my prep work. And but I'm also at the point where I'm also saying I'm free to morph at this point. You know, I've had my bags packed and traveling and teaching and writing a raft of books with a very strict schedule that I followed every day. And now what's ahead? What's next stage? I think the COVID break has made me aware that I likely won't travel and teach in the same way. I've figured out using Zoom. It's less stressful on the body. And I'm going to pick and choose very carefully where I physically go to teach.
Yeah.
But in a sense, that's freedom too. You know, it's looking at your restrictions and choosing the silver lining in them.
I love that. Yeah. Andrea?
That really resonates with me, Cheryl. It's, you know, sometimes we have to find ourselves in a situation where we don't feel, oh man, I'm tearing up, where we don't feel very free. The choices are taken away from us, to all of a sudden realize, wow, that's all the freedom we need. Like
Yeah.
that we have everything we need right here. The elegance of limitations, as they say in the Zentangle world, right? Just a few things is all I need. And I, like you, am picking and choosing where and when I'm teaching, because I know what works for me and where I can show up authentically, where I have the most joy, and where I can bring my creative brilliance out, you know, the most, where it benefits all of us. It benefits me because I feel the most alive doing it, and it benefits my students because they get the best of me. And oftentimes it's not what the image of what I used to have. And some may look at that as like, wow, that's limiting. It's not limiting. It's all the freedom in the world to know, you know, what those limitations may be, but going with it. The definition that we had is the creative freedom is based on the idea of free thinking and adopting an approach that's outside the box. And so sometimes it goes back to flexibility, right? It goes back to thinking about things differently. Well, how could I do this differently? And for me, again, back to that March 17th decision, luckily I already had the technology set up so that I could just run with it. And I've been on Zoom meetings with Minette already, so I knew the platform, and just that shift over into teaching in this fashion. And I, like you, find it to work very well. I like it.
But
So,
you know, that freedom to say no,
yeah.
because it used to be, if I was offered a conference teaching position, or, with one of the big guilds or whatever, and I said no, the risk with that always was that's the end of my career. I won't be picked up on the circuit, and once you drop off, it's hard to get back on. And so that's actually freedom now, that ability to say no.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I love that. I love that. And, I'm listening to you guys talk, and one of my first business coaches always used to say structure liberates you. And it's the same as creative constraints, which also liberate you, right? It's, a key principle of design that constraints make us more creative. And there've been, amazing studies done around the concept of looking at people that tend to generate a lot of really brilliant ideas. They all flow, the most award-winning ideas flow from constraints. So it's a fascinating way to think about what our definition of freedom is and what our approach is. And to me, I find it really hard to disconnect freedom from time, right? And so if I want time freedom, what am I willing to put in place from a structure, organization perspective, so that I have more freedom, so that I have a little bit longer to play, to morph, to relax. So as always, this is such a juicy, rich conversation. I feel like we could just go on and on. It's been really challenging to keep these conversations short and sweet. And we know there's going to be a lot more richness to come. So be sure to watch Cheryl's video this week, to go follow her on social media. She posts a lot of really fun cartoons that keep us all laughing out loud. So Cherryl, Thank you so much for being part of the Creative Stretch. Thank you for your generosity of time and for coming to play with us today.
You're welcome. It was fun to talk
Absolutely.
With
Thanks.
people.
with real people.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.